Are we ready?
Not quite.
Okay.
Steve's going to sleep and I keep losing my notes.
Okay, you're now live.
Okay, great. Well, we shall resume the meeting of the Finance Committee. We'll start with the minutes of the August 1st, 2023 Finance Committee meeting. Does anybody have any corrections to the minutes as circulated? Hearing none, the minutes of the August 1st, 2023 Finance Committee meeting are approved as circulated. Next, we'll move on to the audit of the bills to be paid. Who'd like to move approval?
Lorman will say, move approve.
Thank you.
Jackson, I'll second.
All right. Bill, do you have any updates for us?
Yeah, just first of all, wanted to note that there was a revised report that went out. That's the copy that was signed. The total on that report is $4,450,891.31. This is a larger one in part because it includes our second installment TIF payments based on the second installment of property taxes. And there is one addition tonight, and that is for Tribeca Commercial Properties. This is reimbursement request number 4 for the work being done on the Tribeca Stormwater Project, which is a TIF 5 project, and that dollar amount is $5,021.76.
$1,021.76. So I will move that we amend the bills to be paid to include that $5,000 expense. Can I get a second?
Lorman will second.
Okay. All those in favor of approving that amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and then back to the main motion to approve the audit of the bills. And we were working off the revised copy. That's the
Correct.
one we all signed with the addition we just approved. So if there's no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the motion passes. Moving on to resolutions. We have one, resolution 2024-45, amending the 2023 approved ARPA budget for funds for the scanning service for Plan Commission Files project.
This is Wilkes. I move approval for resolution 2024-45, amending the 2023 budget for this expense.
Okay, can you get a second?
Lorman will second.
Thank you. Any discussion? I'll just note that this came up at the Plan Commission meeting and when we were talking about their budget for next year, and it seemed like a small expense to add on to this year and spare the staff from having to solicit new bids in 2024. So I'm happy about this. All right, any further questions or discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving resolution 2024-45, amending the 2023 approved ARPA budget for funds for the scanning service for Plan Commission Files project signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the motion passes. Moving on to agreements, we have many. Starting with memorandum of understanding between the City of Middleton and Middleton Cross Plains Area School District regarding crossing guards. And what I would like is for someone to make a motion to approve, noting that the effective date will be changed to today's date.
I would suggest ratify rather than approve.
Oh, ratify. Thank you. If someone would ratify the MOU, changing the effective date to today's date, that would be great.
So Lorman will move that we ratify the MOU between the effective today's date, August
15th.
15th, 2023.
I'll second that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any discussion?
What was the reason for bringing this back?
It never came to us.
Okay. I thought
Last year.
maybe I'm thinking of last year.
Yeah, on July 5th last year, we did consider, it wasn't called an MOU, it was, I think, an intergovernmental agreement or something. And so when this came to me, I was copied on a message forwarding the signed MOU and realized we'd never had it on the finance agenda.
Right. I mean, it's a snafu. It's something that we've been doing annually for many, many years, and this will clean that up.
And I'm glad you mentioned that it's previously we did this annually. This is an indefinite time period. So we don't have to approve it every year, but we will see the budget every year. Any other questions? Discussion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor of ratifying the memorandum of understanding between the city of Middleton and the Middleton Cross Plains Area School District regarding crossing guards with the effective date of August 15th, 2023, signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the motion passes. Moving on to our second agreement, it's the development agreement for Pleasant Acres LLC for tax increment district number 5 assistance for Bell Farm Phase 1. And I would like a motion to approve this subject to city attorney review and approval.
Okay, Lorman will make a motion that we approve the development agreement between the city of Middleton and Pleasant Acres, subject to city attorney approval.
Thank you. I'll second that. And discussion. I'll note that one of the things that needs to be changed is on page, I'm going to refer to the packet, page 12 of the packet. It talks about this property being west of Parmenter, and it's actually east of Parmenter. And then also on page 26, the notice, or I'm sorry, page 22, the developer needs to provide information on where and to whom the notices should be sent. And then on page 26, there are some other blanks to be filled in with information provided by the developer.
We just get a quick recap of what the fiscal impact is.
Let me just forward to those pages in the exhibits. This was conceptually approved by the Finance Committee and Council earlier this year, and is now coming back in the form of an agreement. This is for phase 1 of the Bell Farm development, and the TIF assistance is being provided in 3 different subphases, A, B, and C, with mixed-use buildings in those subphases. The total amount of TIF eligible expenses that are identified is $12,368,775. That's the list of TIF eligible costs. They would also be eligible for interest on the developer financed TIF note. That's estimated at about 4.1 million. So maximum TIF incentive for the entire phase 1 project is 16,490,979. One thing that is new in the agreement is the breakdown by subphase. The developer anticipates that as each subphase is completed, they would be submitting documentation of TIF eligible costs, and we would be issuing 3 separate TIF bonds for each subphase. So it's just taken that total TIF eligible cost and broken that down by each of the subphases. The totals remain the same. Subphase A includes the infrastructure and phase-wide costs, and then specific costs for the other buildings in B and C. And the one other financial piece that is updated slightly is the base value has been allocated by phase within the development. This property, when it was originally assessed, was assessed at ag value assessment. So the total assessed value for base value was about $12,000. That's now broken down by phase. So the new base value for this phase 1 area is $2,780. That does not make a material impact on the increment projections.
Thank you for that, Bill. I did have a question on page 14. It lists the subphases, and it shows that subphases B, which is the parlor, and C, Bluebird, will both be done by July 1st of 2028, I believe. I show page 14.
Yeah, the anticipated construction dates were provided by the developer. The timeline is getting started a little later than they originally intended when they made the TIF application. However, the way the increment calculations will work is each year, once the TIF bonds are issued, we'll be calculating the actual assessed value that's been created, the incremental taxes, and using that for paying that out. So we've had that discussion that those increment payments in the earlier year may be lower than on the projected schedule based on when the buildings are completed. But those are projections, and they will have the ability, if the value increases in later years in the project, that they would be able to potentially earn the full amount of the TIF increment that's agreed to as part of the development agreement.
Okay. And Abby, can you confirm that those two subphases are on the same timeline? And if you can't, it's not a big deal. That might be one of the things to confirm before.
Sorry, off the top of my head, I cannot confirm that because oh yes, the phasing schedule has changed so much with this project that
I'll just note that as something perhaps to double check.
I can confirm that those were the dates that were provided after our most recent conversation.
Great. All right, any further discussion, questions, comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the development agreement with Pleasant Acres LLC for tax increment District Number 5 assistance for Bell Farm Phase 1, subject to city attorney review and approval, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the motion passes. Moving on to our third agreement. This is an agreement in City of Middleton and Block Power for data deployment software for decarbonization projects. Who would like to move approval so we can discuss?
Sure, Laura will move approval for the
Okay, and I will second that.
project.
Any discussion, or would anyone like some background from Kelly? I will just say that I know this is 100% funded through the Public Service Commission Energy Innovation Grant Program. I think it's a great project. Makes me wonder if we're going to need additional staff to help advance our decarbonization goals over the next 9 years with the IRA funding. And I would encourage the Sustainability Committee, once this project is completed, maybe during one of your semi-annual reports to the Common Council, it'd be great to have a brief presentation or slide about what you learned and what's next. All right, any further questions or comments?
I just want to say I'm continue to be blown away by Kelly's ability to get grants.
I think that's a great observation, and I think there is a lesson learned for the city about what can be done if we have somebody, and I know Kelly can't even dedicate her time to grant writing, but if we did have someone who could dedicate their time to grant writing for the city, I think that position would pay for itself many times. Okay, all those in favor of approving the agreement between City of Middleton and Block Power for data deployment software for decarbonization projects signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the motion passes. Moving on to our fourth agreement. This is an agreement with Hydro Corp in the amount of $70,608 for the biennial cross connection control program for the water utility. You would like to move approval.
This is Jackson. I'll move.
Approval contingent upon satisfaction of the city attorney with the contract form.
I'll move approval contingent upon satisfaction of the city attorney with the contract form.
Thank you.
Laura will second that.
Thank you. Any discussion?
I just want to know what it is.
Sean? Make sure you turn the microphone on.
Well, it's a brand new one. I turned it on. It's good. Sure. This is a state mandated program that requires the water utility to make sure that businesses and residents, anyone who's a water utility customer, has means in place and functioning and tested to make sure that water and sanitary sewer don't intermingle. So we can't cross connect.
And this is a 2-year agreement, correct?
This is a 2-year agreement, and we've been working with this company since at least 2015.
Thanks.
Any further discussion or questions?
Now I know what it is.
Good. All right. All those in favor of approving the agreement with HydroCorp in the amount of $70,608 for biennial cross-connection control program for water utilities signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Moving on to agreement number 5. This is the city developer agreement for Bell Farm Phase 1. And if someone would like to move approval, I don't know if Bill or Brian got the email with the various motions. I'll just tell everyone Public Works considered both of the developments, the major developments going in. We considered them last night and we had 3 things for each one. And now it's going to be getting complicated. So I had shared with Brian and Bill a list of motions that are consistent with what the Public Works Committee discussed. And if they aren't consistent, I hope Sean will catch that. Okay, so the first one is the city developer agreement for Bell Farm Phase 1. And you see the motion on the screen, and it's kind of, I don't know what that mark is, but it ends with, and that if the above items are not completed by March 31st, then the approval is void. That is part of the motion. So if anybody would like to move approval subject to city attorney review and approval.
Okay, let's see.
And you don't have to read the whole thing. The reason for putting it on the screen is to help everybody see.
Okay.
And this text comes from the minutes.
Subject, then I'll move for approval, subject to city attorney approval. The development agreement for Bell Farm Phase 1.
Thank you. And I will second that. Okay. Discussion. I will note that 2 things that need to be looked at during the review, Larry, would be on, I think it's page 68, the MMSD figure needs to be filled in. And then also Kathleen, the developer, her last name is spelled incorrectly on page 76 of the packet.
And the spelling I corrected on.
Oh, you did on the one that, great, thank you. All right, well, if there is no further discussion, then all those in favor of approving the city developer agreement for Bell Farm Phase 1, subject to city attorney review and approval with the deferred effective date of approval upon completion of these 6 items. And that if the above items are not completed by March 31st, 2024, then the approval is void, signify by saying aye.
Can I just ask one quick question? I'm sorry.
Sure.
I'm just assuming that's going to be enough time for all of these things. The one thing that gives me pause is the WDNR, considering how long we waited for the DOT. Is that
Sure.
of concern at all?
I'm confident Bruce Holler, the developer's engineer, has already submitted
Okay.
permit applications.
Okay.
And he was confident last night too, that this is not going to be a problem on time.
But that's a great question because that date is going to show up again for both this and Red Tail Ridge, and both developers said last night that they have confidence they'll be able to meet those. Date. Okay, well then, all those in favor of approving the city developer agreement for Bell Farm Phase 1, subject to city attorney review and approval with those 6 items and the deferred date. And that if the above items are not completed by March 31st, 2024, then the approval is void, signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the motion carries. Moving on to our 6th and final agreement. It's the city developer agreement for Red Tail Ridge Phase 1. And we have 2 sets or 2 different motions that I'm hoping someone will make. The first one relates to some requests that the developer made and the staff recommended we accept in Public Works, and that's what we did. So who would like to move the first 3 requests?
I will move that we grant them for discussion purposes.
Okay, so we have a motion to grant the developer's requests, the 3 items shown on the screen, for discussion purposes, and I will second that. And so let's discuss.
Has there been other instances where we've negotiated the construction costs with the developer?
Yeah, so let me clarify. So number one, our standard template calls for a 5% calculation of their construction costs to be given to us to use to hire an independent construction observation firm and testing, et cetera. In this case, the construction value is a pretty large number. So 5% turns into a lot of money. And so the developer and I were talking and proposed instead 3.5 might be a better starting point. This is, for all practical purposes, treated as a deposit. It's auditable at the end of the project. So if we spent more, they owe us money. If we collected too much upfront, we pay it back. So the risk is very low on this.
And what's to prevent this becoming a standard request?
I think a lot of them just have a much lower construction value. And so a 5% calculation historically has been in a pretty sweet spot for us to mesh with our expenses for construction observation. This one is just of a different scale.
But I'm not sure I see the language you're talking about. What you're doing is you're treating the deposit for construction costs as if it were an escrow, even though it's not called an escrow.
That's correct.
And that's been your practice consistently with developers. So when they're short, you ask for more money for construction observation. And if we have too much, we give some of it back.
And there are a couple of those things. Street lighting is another one that's in that same category. Whatever it costs, it costs. We'll take an estimate up front. Street signs, that we do that work using their money. And if we collected too much, we give it back. So there are some other calculations inherent in the city developer agreement for which our estimate is the final answer, right or wrong. This is not one of them.
Sean, while you're at the microphone, would you explain item number 3? We were talking last night about how that is how it used to be.
Sure. Yeah, this used to be really typical that a developer would build infrastructure through the lower layer of pavement, get some buildings going, and eventually, usually the next year, put the surface course of pavement on the upper layer. The state legislature changed the rules and said, we are not allowed to ask for more than 14 months duration of surety beyond substantial completion, which is the lower layer of pavement, the way they defined it for us. So we don't get to redefine that term, and we don't get to exceed that length of time. And effectively what it meant to us from an agreement perspective is if the city wanted a 12-month warranty period on the final construction, the developer was pinned into completing the project and getting final acceptance within 2 months of substantial completion. And we set up our whole template to follow that timeline. This developer requested, and I talked it over with Matt Fleming, requested voluntarily that he would very much prefer with his project schedule to get through lower layer of asphalt pavement, get some buildings going, and come back next spring and finish the project. But we still wanted a 12-month warranty on the finished project. So he said he would extend the surety as part of that deal then. So this is at their request, and we're just meeting their request.
And to be clear, this is how it was done everywhere, except for the recent change by the legislature. It made things more difficult for every community in the state where there's development.
Thank you.
Could you also address number 2 or speak to number 2?
Yeah, so this request was, phase 1 is along the entire frontage of High Road. And typically then we collect that money for future improvements to High Road. adjacent to their plat. So it would be the east half of High Road along the length of the phase one plat. And the developer requested, could he pay that over phases 1 and 2? Half now, half in his next phase, whenever that is. He seemed to be on a pretty aggressive schedule when we were talking with him last night. I don't think there's a big risk to the city here either. I'm confident there will be a phase 2 prior to us rebuilding the road. But that is something I didn't have a strong opinion on one way or the other. I presented it, I think it's reasonable. If the council feels otherwise, that's fine. We don't have to do that.
And because High Road is on for what year?
It isn't. There's a significant portion of that that's still not within our jurisdiction. So while we could build High Road between Misty Valley and Red Tail Ridge, we can't build through the town portion of right of way without their permission.
And that's south of Misty Valley.
It is, and south of Red Tail Ridge.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Which is the worst part.
Well, right. It's the low point.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is also a conventional thing that we can do in special circumstances. The difficulty is that you hope that the money that was deposited is enough to really measure what the cost is for this development when High Road is redone. And so we are taking their money now and doing whatever we can with it to make the best possible earnings on it. Presumably, these are good faith estimates, which we have agreed to for what the High Road reconstruction will be. But if road costs accelerate faster than we anticipated and less than what the amount deposited was, we're on the hook and we'll have to pay it regardless. If somehow, it's just like an escrow, if somehow the cost of road construction decreases dramatically and we make money on it, that's okay too. Not very likely, but there is some risk here, but we are trading off getting the money now in exchange for not having to special assess it later or any other way of cost recovery related to this plat.
Thanks. Thank you. Any further discussion or questions?
So how city finance feel on this?
I don't have any projections on future road costs, although I'm not holding out for that, having money left over at the end. I do think that it makes sense to collect the money where we can upfront and have that something as a deposit that we can hold. I think that's certainly a reasonable approach, and it's always nice to have the money in our balances when we need to do the project.
Okay.
Great. All right, well, if there are no further questions, we'll go forward with a vote on this first motion, which is to Alder Jackson moved to grant the developer's requests to do the 3 things that are showing on the screen. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that motion carries. So now we move on to approving the city developer agreement for Red Tail Ridge Phase 1 with a deferred effective date of approval upon completion of the 8 items showing on the screen, noting that the city does not endorse the phasing plan beyond Phase 1, so that the issue of water looping can be revisited, and that if the above items are not completed by March 31st, 2024, then the approval is void. And this one, I don't think we had subject to city attorney review and approval, or do you want that in there, Sean?
I think it would be of benefit. I think you're right that we didn't, but I do think it would be of benefit.
Okay, so I'm adding that in into after Red Tail Ridge Phase 1. So with that, who would like to move this, make this big motion?
All right, I will move for approval for the city developer agreement for Red Tail Ridge Phase 1 with a deferred effective date approval upon completion of the 8 items noted here, and that the above items are to be completed by March 31st, 2024.
And that we do not endorse the phasing plan,
Beyond phase one.
subject to city attorney review and approval.
What Lisa said.
A lot of clauses in here. Okay, and I will second that. Discussion. Sean, do you want to just explain briefly the looping issue? I mean, this came up last night and we all were like, well, we are only approving phase one, but it seems an important thing to note that.
And it's pretty typical for development to start with just one entry point. There's one water loop that goes in and serves the first phase. We usually try to keep an eye on how many customers could be out of water at any given time. And so if that one feed water loop breaks, everybody on the service end of that is out of water until that break is repaired.
Which is true, but it's also true that these will be the newest services in the city service. So the likelihood of a breakage is probably far lower than in an old part of town.
I would love to say that, but a brand new fire hydrant on Lake Street failed.
Okay.
It happens. It's not common, but it does happen. And so we tend to get a little nervous about that when we're talking about people's water.
An active construction site.
Sure, right? They need water. Fire protection needs water. So at some point, we want to see a second service connection, and we call that looping, to say that sort of regardless of if a pipe breaks, there's another route for water to get to most of the customers. And if we have a couple dozen without, that's fine, but we don't want 100 without.
Okay, any further discussion or questions? All right, hearing none, all those in favor of the motion to approve the city developer agreement for Red Tail Ridge Phase 1, subject to city attorney review and approval, with a deferred effective date of approval upon completion of the 8 items listed, noting that the city does not endorse the phasing plan beyond phase 1, so that the issue of water looping can be revisited, and that if the above items are not completed by March 31st, 2024, then the approval is void. Signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that motion passes. Moving on to bids and quotes, we have 2. The first is the award of quote to debt book or for debt book renewal for 2024 through 2026. Like to move approval.
Norman will move approval for the renewal of that book.
This is Jackson. I'll second.
Thank you. Discussion.
Can provide
Bill?
some background if that'd be helpful.
Sure, we have time.
About a year ago, the city approved the debt book software, which we use for preparation for our audit, as well as for tracking our debt issues, as the name implies. But one of the main motivations in originally going with debt book was they have a solution for tracking and doing all of the audit calculations for our lease agreements, which implemented a new accounting standard, GASB 87, which we're required to implement for 2022. For the 2023 finances, we'll have to implement another new accounting standard. This one is GASB 96, and it's related to subscription-based information technology arrangements, which is trying to get at software as a service and other IT arrangements, which can have multiple years and a large financial impact. The debt book software has the capacity for doing the calculations and tracking for those items as well. So we are recommending that we renew our subscription with debt book for an additional 3-year period that would continue to do the debt, the leases, and the subscription-based IT arrangements. As part of the 3-year renewal, they are waiving the implementation fees for adding the subscription-based IT arrangements. There is an annual cost increase of about $1,000 per year. That's part of why we'd like to lock in for 3 years, so we have some control over what the future costs are. And our intention would be to allocate those costs across the various city funds based on the number of leases or agreements or debt issues for each fund.
Thanks for that background, Bill. Anyone have questions or comments? All right, hearing none, all those in favor of approving the award of quote for debt book renewal for 2024 through 2026 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the motion carries. Moving on to our second bid and or quote, the award of bid to North Shore Track Services, Inc. in an amount not to exceed $117,820 for rail spur repairs.
Mrs. Wilkus, I'll move approval of the bid of the award of bid to North Shore Track in the amount not to exceed $117,820 for rail spur repairs.
Thank you.
This is Jackson. I'll second that motion.
Thank you. Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the award of bid to North Shore Track Services, Inc. in an amount not to exceed $117,820 for rail spur repairs signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the motion carries. We have two miscellaneous items. The first one is the CIVMIC liability insurance policy renewal for 2025 through 2026, and staff is recommending approval at the current retention levels for option 1 on the acceptance page.
I'm going to make a motion that we approve civic liability insurance policy renewal. 2025, 2026,
Specifically option 1.
specifically option 1.
Great, thank you. I will second that. Any discussion? Or Bill, since we have time, would you like to give a little background?
Sure. So CIVMIC stands for Cities and Villages Mutual Insurance Company. That's a cooperative of just Wisconsin cities and villages. The city has been a member for, I believe it's about 8 or 9 years at this point. Each year CIVMIC, or every 2-year period, CIVMIC does their liability pricing. So we have a 2-year pricing guarantee. So for 2024, we already are locked in and set that we have a 2% increase in our liability premium. They are providing us quotes for extension through 2025 and 2026. The increases in those years are 3.5% in 2025 and 3% in 2026. As part of the renewal, they give us an option if we want to adjust our self-insured retention level that essentially acts similar to a deductible. That's the amount that we need to pay before the CIVMIC coverage would kick in. At our last 2-year renewal, we increased the self-insured retention from $37,500 on a liability claim to $50,000. If we were to increase it again, the next tier would go up to $75,000. We are not recommending that increase at this time, in part because we just did an increase with the last renewal, and in part because we've had a couple of larger claims with high defense costs where we are hitting that self-insured retention. And just to limit our out-of-pocket exposure, we're recommending we keep with the current retention levels.
Okay, thank you for that. Any questions for Bill? All right, hearing none. All those in favor of approving the CIVMIC liability insurance policy renewal for 2025 through 2026 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the motion carries. And our last agenda item is change order number 3 for additional water main work in the downtown Parmenter Street reconstruction.
This is Wilkus. I move approval of the change order.
Thank you.
This is Jackson. I'll second that motion.
Thank you. Discussion? I have a question for Sean. Just 2 changes were directed verbally and through email. What, can you tell us what they were, please?
The first change that we had for water main work was along Elmwood Avenue, where we didn't know at the time until we got into it that main was in old and poor condition. It was cast iron, but our record drawings did not reflect that. The second change order was really work along the eastern portion of Elmwood Avenue. That's a resurfacing project, but through some drop in coordination, it wasn't included in that bid. So fortunately, we had a contractor downtown doing water main work and added that in as a change order to get those services connected. And so we just put it onto this project to make that happen. This third change order really is back associated with the downtown Elmwood Avenue, where some side service connections also were a different size than is shown in our record drawings. And so to make the whole project work, this is the part that was just verbally done on the fly as it was happening.
So the work is already done,
It is done.
approving the change order. So then I asked Larry, is this an instance of ratification or is it okay to just approve the change order?
If the work is already done, I would suggest ratification.
Okay. Then I will make a new motion to ratify change order number 3 for additional water main work in the downtown Parmenter Street reconstruction.
Oh, this is Wilkes, I'll second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All right, then all those in favor of approving the ratification of change order number 3 for additional water main work in the downtown Parmenter Street reconstruction signify by saying aye.
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 Hi.
Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it. We've reached the end of our agenda, and so I will declare this meeting adjourned.